Welcome back. The House Transportation Committee, February 21st. Oh, excuse me, we're starting. Yeah, sorry. We're back, and this afternoon we are shifting away from our line-by-line budget review, and we're here with Erin Sisson. Am I getting your?
Yes, that is.
Okay. There's a deputy director with the Highway Division at the Agency of Transportation to talk to us on the topic of the Vermont State Standards update. So welcome, Erin.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I do also have here with me Rob White, who's the Project Delivery Bureau Director at the Agency of Transportation. So we wanted to dive into this, and just as a place to start, I want to make sure that I help everybody sort of catch up to speed on where we've been with this conversation surrounding the Vermont State Standards, what we refer to as the multimodal development and delivery, the M2D2. We use a lot of acronyms, and we call the Vermont State Standards document the Vermont State Standards. And I'll just clarify what each of those is as we go and start with a little bit of history. But essentially, the purpose of revising the Vermont State Standards is really getting a broad group of stakeholders to the table and updating these standards that were last revised in 1997. So it's been a few years. These state standards are outdated at the time in the late 90s. The group that brought those together were sort of ahead of the curve compared to some of our partners in other agencies around the country. And now, fast forward 25 years later, we have some work to do to bring them back up to the state of the practice in highway engineering. So we want to keep pace with the national standards as well. We want to make sure that our transportation facilities are designed to meet the aging infrastructure needs, but the community needs as well, and of course accommodating all of the users of the transportation network. So really focusing on the multimodal aspects of this and wrapping in all of the uses of the network into our everyday practices. So the Vermont State Standards are, Representative Shaw already pointed out how the Vermont State Standards as a title is a little bit generic, and it doesn't necessarily get to the point of what this document is intended to do. And so something we want to focus on going forward is making sure that we come up with a title that makes it very clear what this is. And it's essentially design guidance that informs our decision-making process on the roadway network, the bridge network, all of our infrastructure related to transportation. And the engineers use this document to help inform planning, design, on the backside, the operations and the maintenance of the infrastructure. So it really is sort of comprehensive design guidance that starts from the beginning of the process all the way through maintenance of the infrastructure. And coming up with a new, clever, clear name is going to be one of our first goals of this project. So providing that technical direction to those within the agency and our consultant partners and our municipal partners outside of the agency in terms of the design and the needs of the infrastructure. We want to think about access, mobility, safety, and then also the context of Vermont and the context of every specific location that we're referring to and looking to updated designs for. So really wrapping all of that into this future document. To take a step back, in 2014, there was legislation passed essentially that said the agency will pull together a broad group of stakeholders from the public and the private sector and come up with a plan to revise the state standards, basically allowing those stakeholders to provide input. So based on that legislation, we came up with this M2D2 document, which is the multimodal development and delivery of our projects. And we essentially wanted to make sure that we were balancing the needs and the modes of all of the users across the network collectively. We wanted to understand what our Vermont State Standards had for barriers or gaps, and then further what opportunities we might have to expand upon that and integrate all of the modes more holistically. The process involved over 50 stakeholders. So these were people from VTrans that were planners, engineers, they were external partners that were maybe business owners or municipalities or trucking companies or advocacy groups across the state. So we really pulled in a lot of different groups, and we did a series of workshops that had different focuses, whether it was, what are the barriers to our existing process? What is the land use of a location? How does that play into the different concepts that we're looking at? talking about freight, talking about active transportation, and then again, really focusing on multimodal integration in everything that we do. So that was the process, and the product then in 2015, we came out with this M2D2 plan, which was essentially a framework for how we were going to get from point A to point B and really update what we call the Vermont State Standards in a much more comprehensive way, as well as communicating that with internal and external stakeholders, providing training so that folks all understand what the intent is and how to be using this document, and clarifying some of the vague title and other pieces of the product. So fast forward from 2015 to 2022, for a lot of different reasons, we have had this document in hand and we know that we need to get to the updated Vermont State Standards. But last year, there was legislation passed that said we would come back to you all this year and we would tell you what our plan is, we would budget for it. And so that's why we're here today, to let you know what the plan is. And again, this language, I'm sure you all have it, but essentially we want to take those recommendations from the M2D2 document and really, instead of thinking about a very black and white hard copy book of standards, we want it to be a user-friendly online interface and sort of bring it from the engineers of the 90s into today's workforce and how people operate, and trying to make it very clear for whether it's internal designers or external consultants. We want it to be a very different, updated look and feel, so that way it's very user-friendly and clear-cut. We also really want to make sure that this document is going to be an umbrella approach, is what I like to think of it as, in terms of integrating other national or state standards into it. So I'll talk a little bit more about complete streets as an example, but that's another piece of guidance that we have, and it's something that needs to work very integrally with this guidance document as well. So thinking about all of the other national standards, state design guidance, and this document really being a centralized point for all of that to come together. So that way it's clear for designers to say, this is the one umbrella that we need to make sure we're referring to, and it will point us to all of the different relevant guidance. So really combining and integrating. Some of the other recommendations from the M2D2 document are making a whole new chapter about design decision-making framework. So getting away from some of the more black and white tables or charts that say, if your road is this classification and you have this AADT, then this is what you need to do. We want to really make it an engineering design decision framework that allows people to understand, again, the context of the location, the land use of the location, what the potential uses are for the different modes of transportation, and really making it less black and white and more based on the needs of the community. So again, the context-based classification system, that's more to the point of not every road, not every town or community is going to be the same and need the same sort of treatment. So how can we make sure that we're making decisions based on that context? Also thinking about the appropriate design users. And I think historically it had been focused on, well, we're designing for the vehicles or we're designing for the trucks. And of course we're shifting towards all users, and we have been for a decade or more. But thinking about what are the uses that this location might need, whether it's transit or trucks or bicyclists or all of the above, and how to balance that. Then we wanted to really make sure that we're thinking about a range of design options, so that instead of, again, the black and white, if this, then that, we're looking at a range of perhaps a preferred minimum. If we're thinking about a bike shoulder, for example, maybe a preferred minimum width, a practical minimum width, and then a preferred and practical maximum. So that way it's really, again, providing that range for the engineering teams to think about and apply within the context of the project. So our current status in terms of what we've been doing is we've been carrying some state funding in FY 24 and 25. So that's reflected in the budget. And this is, we're thinking on the scale in terms of the effort for updating these standards is on a scale of $750,000 to $1 million. And I'll explain that a little bit more, because we really want to make sure that we pull in some national expertise so that it's more than just the agency in a room trying to understand how to get from point A to point B. But again, we want to be involving all of those stakeholders that have been at the table this whole time, pulling them into the conversation, We want to have that national expertise to make sure that they're thinking about the AASHTO design guidance that's being updated and all of the other national efforts that are ongoing, and making sure that we're getting the best products that will, again, put Vermont sort of above and beyond some of the other states and what others are doing. We want to issue an RFP for a consultant to help our internal and external teams within the next couple of months. So hopefully by June, we'll have that out on the street. And so in fiscal 24, we can begin to work on this project. We also had been carrying state funds in the budget, as I mentioned, but we heard some good news from the Federal Highway Administration last week, actually, that because of all of the intricacies in how this effort ties into some of the language in IIJA and all of the multimodal aspects, they're able to fund 80% of this. So that was a really big win for us, and we will be able to move forward with the partnership with FHWA and making sure that this really does integrate everything that the IIJA and the agency is working towards together.
So 80% of the 750 or a million.
Yes.
What is the request in the budget for this?
I forget the exact, it was a pretty small,
100,000 maybe. I think the total is 800 to a million.
yeah.
Total project.
Yeah.
And so we had put that small placeholder while we were working out the funding with the Federal Highway Administration. That can be refined as we work through the details. But again, this is going to take, because it's such a substantial effort, we're anticipating 2 to 3 years because of the stakeholder engagement, and because we really want to make sure that we haven't brought this up we haven't done this in 25 years. We want to make sure that we're doing it right. We're involving all of the right people at the appropriate times, and we need to make sure that we're doing it once and we're doing it right. So we're really looking forward to Federal Highways participation and all of the stakeholders that are going to be involved. And there's 4 different phases outlined here, sort of that existing conditions and understanding the different policy considerations that we need to wrap into this, working with folks to understand what the goals are in outreach to the stakeholders and getting all of them in the room, and then really the plan development and understanding what that interface is going to look like, what's going to be very clean and user-friendly, while also wrapping in equity and land use context and smart growth. And then phase 4, we really want to focus on the implementation of this, because we never want to produce a document that goes and sits on a shelf. And so we want to make sure that we're rolling this out in a way that municipalities understand it and that our partners understand it, and that we're all sort of working together to implement it in a consistent approach across the state. And I mentioned that I would wrap complete streets into this as well. And so I just have a couple of slides about that, and then could open it up to questions. So I know you had some testimony maybe last week about complete streets, and I wanted to maybe reiterate that the law was passed in 2011, and the VTrans guidance for complete streets and how we roll that into our projects was rolled out in 2012. And there were some questions on how that guidance within VTrans was sort of implemented. And again, to the point of creating a document that sits somewhere, we really did go out to, here's just a few examples of ACCD was holding municipal days where we would go out to municipalities and work with ACCD to help them understand what the guidance was saying and what the law was saying as well. We would have our teams go to the transportation advisory committees or the regional planning commissions to help them understand what this guidance was saying and how it was going to be wrapped into Vermont projects. We worked with Vermont local roads. We've done presentations at some walk bike summits in the last few years. And then in 2022, we were actually starting to kick off updating that complete streets guidance as well, which I know you heard from Kevin Marshy. And so we did a sort of comprehensive complete streets training on that, so that we could get everybody sort of on the same page as we update this guidance. And again, that updated guidance is going to be coming in this summer. So that is an example of something that will be rolled into this Vermont state standards conversation. So that way, the umbrella concept can just wrap all of the different guidance into one comprehensive document. So that was a lot of information, but I welcome any questions or thoughts or any additions as well.
Committee, Representative Shaw.
Sure, I'll jump in. So would you consider, when you update your standards, rolling in the complete street guidance, and when you do the policy for the standards, would that be part of this new document?
It would be, the way we're envisioning it is sort of part of it as a companion document. So direct references, I'm not sure whether we'll go down the route of, full appendices to the document, if that's what you're thinking, but we absolutely need to reference it and make sure that they're combined. So once we get a consultant on board, thinking about which documents we need to integrate and how that will be most successful is definitely a first part of that conversation. So we know we need to do it, but we're not 100% sure what that's going to look like yet.
There's a lot of interest in the community for some complete streets language in Hayville somewhere.
Mm.
Just wondering how far we should progress if you're progressing a parallel track or a not parallel track with you. We could be saying one thing and then we could be headed in a different direction. So, meaning that.
Yeah, so the way that we have tried to, like I said, we go out to a lot of different groups and talk about how we implement complete streets. And the way that we really try to think about it and present it is that it really is integration from the beginning. And so the best way that we've found to do it that's worked really well is when a community can express whether it's their needs, whether it's their strategic plan, and if they can say that they have X, Y, or Z concept for a complete street within their town, and we might have a project coming through and we're having those conversations really early on, integrating their vision with whatever's within our standards and what we're able to do, and trying to make sure that we're having that integration conversation. So that way it's not one community sort of coming to the table later in the game and we sort of feel like we have a project already budgeted that's advancing very quickly, and it can make it harder to have that integration. So I think having communities understand that the integration early on for complete streets, and that we already have guidance and the state law, obviously, that's telling us that we're doing this and we want to be doing it for economic development and multimodal uses and everything else. That's what we've seen work the best, but.
Representative McCoy?
So would you envision maybe the state and towns accessing the regional planning commissions for this particular thing? Because they help tremendously when towns are planning whatever projects they have in their town.
Right. So a little bit of both. So working with the RPCs, absolutely. Something that I don't know that we've done a presentation on this session is a concept that we've been working with folks on about, what is it called? Bike and pedestrian integration planning. And essentially so that the towns have a place to go through the RPCs and then to the state to work on their own planning documents. So as you say, some of the bigger municipalities might have resources to do that, others might not so much. And so we want to try to get a handle on how the RPCs and how the state can help them to get to that point, so that way we can integrate better. So we're starting a pilot on that soon, I believe.
I think I don't know the exact timing, but I think later on this year, we're trying to hand out some money to communities for them to do those plans, or RPCs to help with those plans. The biggest help we have is when we come to a town with a project and they have a plan, right? It sort of sets the stage for everything else. If they don't, we sort of have to figure that out along with them, and it can be kind of a heavy lift sometimes.
So I have a follow-up question. This is probably a follow-up to what Representative Shaw was asking. You're not imagining with this state standards process, our complete streets policy and program is not going to change.
No.
I think that was part of a concern,
Okay.
like how it speaks to or aligns with or is incorporated into the standards.
Right. So we don't envision that changing holistically. It's more about integrating. So again, the Complete Streets guidance will be out this summer and very publicly available, and we'll be working to spreading awareness and training on that, but really integrating that into how we plan and develop and maintain our networks through this Vermont state standards. So absolutely not re-envisioning that, just making that a piece of our everyday planning.
Okay, that helps clarify. Other folks? Go ahead, Representative Pouch.
Thank you. So I'm assuming, and the purpose is 1 and 2. I mean, number one, all the technical specifications, they must be coming down from the federal government in some cases, these expectations, how big a culvert has to be or how deep the bed, or the breakaway of a light pole and all that. Those are all the things that will go in here. So if somebody's going to design something, they're going to pull out those minimum specifications or expected specifications. Then there's a second piece of how to integrate, now you've got the road, how do you integrate all the multimodal pieces that might be part of it?
Yes, absolutely. So there's the what's the minimum that absolutely needs to happen, and then there's but then based on the context and the use, whether it's the land use or the multimodal use, then how does that get wrapped on top of what the minimum needs are for the infrastructure and the life cycle of it and to get the federal funding, but then how do you bring in all of that other context to make it really something that the community can take full advantage of? Yeah, did you, Rob, want to add something?
Well, I was gonna add something because, I'm doing this presentation on the Winooski Bridge coming up, and I think what happens sometimes is federal government and all these different AASHTO, they have different standards, but they don't really bring in the context of where we live. And like the Winooski Bridge, the grant we got is basically categorized as a rural location, right? And to us,
So the rest of the
it's not
country,
rural to
yeah.
us, but from the federal level, it's still rural. So as you distill down all these different standards, we're trying, and I think the point Aaron is really trying to make is that we're trying to make it context sensitive, right? Like where are we standing right now? Because in most people's eyes, all of Vermont is rural, so it shouldn't matter. Everything's gonna be built exactly the same. We don't want to build that way. And I think it gives some opportunity where there's historic elements, right, where you could probably relax, and so these standards are going to talk about that. Where can they be relaxed, and for what reasons? It is interesting sometimes when you look from the a different perspective. We are seeing that.
Representative Lally?
This is very exciting. I was wondering if you will be working, and imagine on some level you will, collaboratively with ACCD through the designation program on how to, so that this can be sort of operationalized in their, those existing contexts. And not just within a designated village itself, but also I think it's really important to create designated the downtowns and villages, that transition area.
Right.
The fringe area, which is a place that we're also increasingly looking as a venue for potential new walkable neighborhoods, right?
Right, yeah, absolutely. So ACCD is a partner that's been involved with us to date, and we absolutely plan on keeping them involved because we have those exact conversations about smart growth and the fringe type areas, and so we definitely want to keep working with them as we go. Yeah.
It would be, it would be really wonderful to get just almost like a pattern book established, like do this and this, it would be a set of expectations of what people can expect. Seems like it could be kind of coordinated with housing types too.
Yep, and again, that's, we want to create a lot of flexibility so that way you can look at the land use and the housing types without feeling like we're pigeonholing. And so that was one of the issues before, is that it felt a little bit like, well, black and white. If this, then we do that. And we want to make it a little bit more flexible. So I agree that we want to be thinking
Ask
about
one more question.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're thinking about roundabouts and the ability to use those in a lot more contexts. It's early days, but.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I'm a big fan of roundabouts, and I come from a traffic and safety background, and so the agency, absolutely, we're looking at where the right places are to use those, and when you sort of get that bang for the buck in terms of the pedestrian safety, the cyclist safety, the driver safety, and the congestion, all of the different benefits that they add. We're definitely looking at that to use as a treatment to use where we can. Yeah.
Other questions? I do have a question about I feel like I should know this, where the request for the money is. Is it in the policy and planning? Or is it in the big bill?
It's funny, when that came up, I was thinking, where is that money
I know it's
located?
somewhere. I know, I
I'm
just-
not totally sure, but I took a note down that I would look and actually confirm.
I feel like we've been told this, so it's me not remembering exactly where it is, but I think it's in a bigger budget.
Yeah, and sometimes
Line.
those planning funds are in some line item that takes up 3 or 4 different things, so I definitely have.
Because in my mind, I'm confusing it a little bit with the money that AOT is asking because to do the mileage-based user fee, like asking for this year and 2 future years because you're going for a grant. I know, so this is separate, I know, from that, but it's a similar dollar figure that,
Right, we can follow up on that. I don't recall exactly where it is.
Okay. It's in Michelle's, I think it's in policy and
I
planning
think it is
somewhere,
too,
right? I'm
yeah.
just looking to see, and is it, and I guess my question is it for the full project, or is it just for this year, the project?
We can confirm that.
That would be great, that'd be great, because, I think one of the questions was, because the idea is that the funding becomes available, in FY '24, and that's when you go out for the RFP. And I know people want to see this happen faster than, it sounds like, I can appreciate it's like everyone wants it done tomorrow, right? So we can get going, right?
So would
So we
we,
can get the planners in there, get it done. But maybe, I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, why is it a 24, I think it's a 24 to 30 month project? I think you talked about it, but what does
yeah,
that look like?
essentially because of those 4, and I'll just go back, the 4 phases, we really want to make sure that we get that consultant on board, and, that just takes a little bit of time, but once they come in, they can hit the ground running and sort of take that M2D2 document and all the recommendations. Unfortunately, that was in 2015, so we want to make sure there hasn't been anything in the last 8 years that M2D2 document is missing. So we want to make sure that our consultant can work with our team and the stakeholders to make sure that we're capturing everything that we need to capture, making some recommendations, and then phase 2 is really making sure that everybody's involved, the ACCD, the local motion, the smart growth type concepts, everybody that we've been talking about this whole time, and through whether it's workshops or different levels of engagement, we want to make sure that all of the voices are at the table so that we make sure that this is an outcome that AOT needs to be able to feel great about and produce on the ground results for, but that everybody understands how we're balancing the needs of all of the different voices. So that phase 2 piece, I really anticipate being a pretty big lift.
And when do you think that, just to give us a rough, what are the dates for all of these phases? I think we're.
Yeah, that's
if you're issuing the RFP June 2023, selecting a consultant, to begin, you have to review those.
Yeah, I think once we get a consultant on board, I think the hope is that within like a 3 to 6 month time frame, they can do that phase 1 sort of background data gathering. I think phase 2 in my mind is more like that 6 to 9 month time frame. And then the plan development is maybe again, like another 6 months, just to make sure that we're incorporating all of the different pieces, and then the implementation and training and rollout piece of it is again a little while. So, 2 to 3 years is obviously a broad spectrum, but we want to make sure that we're having that conversation with whichever consultant we get on board, make sure that they can help steer us in a direction if they've seen, again, something else nationally that's been working really well for other DOTs across the country. We want to make sure we leave a little bit of flexibility so that we, again, can work as a team to make sure that we're doing it right the first time.
Right. I think I'm always just curious about this stuff. I'd love to see the RFP once it goes out, not to tinker with it, but just to know it's just.
Yeah, once it's public,
Yeah.
I can share that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think the committee, maybe it sounds like other committee members might be interested in that too. Just to see how, how when we pass legislation, how it translates into and with funding, how it translates into an RFP.
Right. Yeah.
Representative, yeah.
So the other thing I was wondering about is whether or not that you're anticipating there'll be some innovative ways to address stormwater management in this redo for, I'm thinking of street trees for soaking up water, slowing down traffic, but also providing shade now that the climate is changing and shade is becoming a concern for cooling buildings and things. Is that going to be a component
We have looked at in other DOTs that have done a similar type thing, there are some stormwater components. It's usually more of a minor piece of it, and so that'll be something we'll have to try to understand better is what parts of that we can wrap into this and what the considerations might be. So I don't think we have a really clear vision for it yet, but we made a note of that.
Representative Shaw?
So, your vision for this, will it be more flexible than the 1997 edition, or that you could, will you be able to change it more easily and readily than instead of being locked into a 25-year plan?
Yes, I would say that the idea of having additional flexibility is absolutely there. And so it would be flexibility within that, you know, it's not something that we want to update every year, for example. We want to make sure it's got flexibility so that way, again, to the context of whatever the project is, whatever the community needs are, that the engineering team can sort of use that judgment and have that flexibility to make a decision that's going to be best for the whole network and the whole use. So I don't think we envision it being updated on a really regular basis because we want it to wrap in other national standards and state standards and everything else, so that way it's flexible so that it can sort of stand the test of time, if that makes sense.
It's condition change, I mean, another 20 years, the electrification of America is going to
Right.
change and make necessary.
Right. Yeah, there may be times, of course, that we'll need to do another update like that, but hopefully it'll be good for a few years.
Questions? Representative Dodge?
So I was just curious how this all relates to like our policy planning and intermodal development division.
So that division of the agency, that's okay. So that division of the agency has been working with, I'll say, so the agency as a whole. I represent the highway division. Michelle Boomhauer, who I think you know, represents PPAID, but she and I have been working really closely on this, so that way we're making sure our planning team and our engineering team are all talking, we're all on the same page, so that we understand any policies that we have that we might need to look at and revisit. So I would say in terms of that division, the agency is absolutely working on this effort together. So they're involved for sure.
Questions? Well, Erin, this is great. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing the update. And I guess one last question I have is, like, it looks as if this process was back in 2014 started and stopped, and you didn't make, and I'm new to this committee, so I'll ask the question, what were the ingredients that led to that delay?
I thought I was going to get out of here without that.
Sorry.
I would say it really is just a matter of competing priorities. And so at the time, we were able to dedicate the funding to do that M2D2 document, but then looking forward and the recommendations it made, different needs at the time and different competing priorities. The idea that it was only going to be coming from state funds, it was much more challenging to think about $1 million of transportation funds. Whereas now we've been working really hard in partnership with FHWA to understand how implications of IIJA play into this and how we're really meshing this all together. And so that's what's allowed us now to pursue federal funds, which can help us get that momentum back.
Right, so IIJA is really providing this opportunity, like, because we're looking at a number of projects.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that now we're in a different place, I hope, so that we can move this forward.
Yep, we're excited to move it forward. We were ecstatic to get that news last week.
That's great. Congratulations. That's good timing for your testimony. That's great.
Nope.
Great.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you
We'll
very
follow
much.
up with a couple of pieces of information you asked for, and
Great.
yeah, excited to keep working on this.
Great. Well, thank you, Erin, and thank you, Rob, for joining us. And thanks for being flexible with our schedule slipping a little bit this afternoon.
Sure.
Say our idiosyncrasies on scheduling.
Oh, I won't, that's too big of a word for me,
Okay.
so. Anyway, thank you, and with that, I'll just say that we're back in here tomorrow morning, I think at 8:30 is our start time. And And I think with that, we can